time is always an issue for parents as well as professionals. How would you suggest to use the questionnaires? How would you rank them? How would you start? We here suggest using the bears as a concept and bringing the other things later on in. Would you agree with that, or do you have another suggestion?
Right, so I think what Osman is asking is, how can we practically use these? And I think it depends on the audience. So, oh, by the way, for the video person, it's okay that I've stepped out behind the, okay, I just want to make sure. So, as a professional, let me start with the professionals and then I want to talk about the parents. So, as a professional, nurse, physician, nurse practitioner, therapist, the most important thing, I think, is ease. And how do you do this in a busy practice? And that's why I brought up the bears. There are other examples as well. But I wanted to bring that up because you may have 2 minutes. Like in the U.S., pediatricians, and I think it's similar here, there's the American Academy of Pediatrics has all these different things they want you to do in your time with the child, you know, your half an hour with the well visit with the child, all sorts of screenings. So the idea is if it's not a quick and easy screen, it's not going to happen. It's going to fall by the wayside. So for the professional, we need to have these options. And so in this Autism Treatment Network, there are these sleep specialists I mentioned, and we put all this together. But then we had to talk to our colleagues who are not sleep specialists, but are developmental pediatricians or other specialists who see kids with autism, and they were like, this is too much to do the Children's Sleep Habits Questionnaire. And that's why we actually came up with 4 questions on the Children's Sleep Habits Questionnaire we thought were important. But we also recognized that that could be too long and we needed to go with something like the bears or some other screening list of questions that they put together. And some of them put together, for example, we're going to ask X about sleep, we're going to ask Y about GI, we're going to ask Z about seizures, and then we're going to be done. We're going to have our very quick and simple set of questions. So that's for the professionals. I think the most important thing is to get sleep on their radar and have them asking about it. And if it's too long of a questionnaire, it may not happen. For the parents, one of the reasons I like the Children's Sleep Habits Questionnaire is it has that kind of yes and no column. So it's easy for a parent to be able to say, oh, these are the areas I'm really concerned about. When I go and I talk to my healthcare provider, I'm going to bring these up. Or if they give it to their therapist to look at, the therapist can have a very quick and easy way of seeing what the parent is concerned about. The other really nice thing about the Children's Sleep Habits Questionnaire is it screens not only for the insomnia, but for some of these medical conditions, so that as a parent, it's very hard to ask a parent or even the therapist to be able to say to their doctor, I'm worried about sleep apnea. But if there's specific questions on there that then they can bring to the physician or the therapist, or we can teach parents how to look at it and say, okay, these are the areas I circled for these particular questions related to snoring. If you scored a number greater than this, or you scored yes to any of these questions, bring this up with your healthcare provider, and that's a way that we can do that. So that's I think that the long answer is to Osman's question is you need to know your audience, and you need to do something that is going to work, because if it's too complicated and it's not done, then you won't have any utility. You won't get sleep on the radar at all. Does that answer what you were? Okay, great. Other questions? Yes.
Do you think that pediatricians are starting to become more aware of and trained in issues related to kids on the spectrum, so that when parents go to see them and talk, when the kids are really young and you don't know what the problem is and the kid is not sleeping, that this is something that will now occur to them? Maybe this is what's going on.
Yeah.
More awareness now?
I do. I think that, the question was how aware or are pediatricians and other healthcare providers being more aware of autism? I think absolutely yes. I think one of the good things that's come out of the increased prevalence of autism, regardless of why it's more prevalent, and we're still trying to figure that out, it's when my child was born in 1998, when my oldest son was born, it was 1 in 150. And now it's 1 in 68. So it's really become quite prevalent. And even, I think, Deborah, when your son was born, it was probably, 1 in 750 or something like that. So it's really increased. And because of that, it's talked more, it's more in the media, continuing medical education, which all of the providers have to do, or is stressing it. And it's just one of those, if you see it and then you are familiar, then you see another child. In fact, that's one of the concerns is making sure we don't overdiagnose, because now it's so prevalent and people are seeing it and people are talking about it. And I think it's good because people are more aware. It makes it more able to get resources. Parents are getting help when it used to be, people didn't understand it. So I think, I think with increased prevalence, one of the good things that comes is an increased awareness and recognition. Yes?
Has there been any studies done in relation to the chronic stress that these kids experience during the day and the lingering effects on it for the sleep disturbances? Has there been any correlation between that? Because I know, all the kids that I go and interact with, they experience significant stress, throughout the day because of their sensory integration differences, their communication differences as well. I'm just curious as to how that impacts on what happens at night.
Yeah. It really is a chicken and an egg question. The increased stress, how does that impact sleep? How does sleep impact stress? And one model that we're exploring, because I'm both a clinician and a researcher as well as a parent, one model that ties it together really nicely is cortisol. Cortisol is a stress hormone. And what they're finding is normally when we wake up, our cortisol level is at its highest, or shortly after we wake up. And then over the course of the day, it goes down. And ideally, before we go to sleep, it's its lowest. What we're finding in kids with autism is that in some kids it's blunted, so that their cortisol does not go from being high during the day when you need it to be high because you're stimulated and you're doing all these things and you need to interact with the world. It's actually not going down at night when you need to be able to go to sleep. And this is this being overstimulated, feeling like my brain can't shut down, which a lot of kids can articulate to me as one of the problems with it's not so much that they're anxious at night, and a lot of kids are anxious, so I don't want to discard or downplay being anxious, but it's more of a just feeling like they can't turn their brain off at night. The parents are like, I can't find the on-off switch. So, and we think that might be this cortisol issue, so that their cortisol is not modulating. But the interesting thing is then if you go to bed or you go to sleep with high cortisol, you're going to potentially have disrupted sleep at night because your cortisol hasn't come down, right? So the increased stressors during the day are adding into making your sleep more disruptive because you're not able to turn off your brain. And then because you're not able to turn off your brain at night and your sleep is disrupted and restless, and a lot of parents will say to me, my child gets the normal number of hours of sleep, but they're restless. Then when they wake up, they haven't had, what I brought up, the restorative theory of sleep, they haven't had a chance to normalize their cortisol, so they start out with higher levels of cortisol, and they're not ready to recharge. They're not getting that recharge for the day. So they start up high, and then the whole vicious circle starts again. And the way and again, that's a theory. We're still having to do more work with cortisol. We want to know if cortisol is abnormally high in the kids with autism who don't sleep.
Yeah.
It requires more study, but But that's one way to think about it. And then when you think about treatment, one of the things that I advocate is not just the behavioral therapy, but sometimes we'll use melatonin in these kids. And melatonin has it actually can calm the brain down and help there. So the idea of the two together, the soothing bedtime routine and the melatonin, might be abolishing that feeling like I can't shut my brain down, allowing the child to calm down, and then they can move forward and hopefully sleep well, and then start out the day less aroused, have more tolerance or resilience for the stressors and the sensory issues that come up during the day. So that's where we're going with that. Yes?
So, say you come from a family with multiple kids, and you interact with the other kids, do you think, even though you're not directly talking towards, say, the one child with autism, when you're interacting with your other kids, do you think that would overstimulate that, say, even if it's not even directly related to them? Right.
So the question is, what about multiple kids? And you're right. I mean, I think the concern would be when you're working with the other kids, particularly around bedtime issues, that could stimulate the child with autism. What we oftentimes will do is we'll teach the family strategies, and you'll hear about them this afternoon, that not only work for one child, but work for other children, including those who might not have autism. So the strategies I'm going to teach you or show you or model actually work for all children. And some parents have said to us, it's actually worked as well for my other kids as my child with autism. What's unique about them, though, is they were developed and are specifically structured to get at the challenges that kids with autism face, as well as their strengths. So, for example, the bedtime routine is very structured. And kids with autism love that. Many kids with autism love that. They love the structure and they love the predictability. But what we found is we've been most successful when we haven't necessarily tailored the intervention just to the child with autism, but to all the kids, and figured out and worked with the family to say, okay, if we pick Johnny's bedtime, Johnny has autism, if we pick Johnny's bedtime to be 9:30 because he needs to be up a little bit later, to have that time to wind down, what are we going to do about his sister and his other brother, and how are we going to, make sure they don't feel like they're having to go to bed earlier and he's able to stay up. We just kind of have to put something together for the whole family. That's a really good point. Yes?
I would like to know, what would you suggest is the quantification of the amount of hours sleep per night or nap times during the day? What is the best?
I knew that was going to come up. The question is how much time should, what are the magic numbers? And it's really interesting. There's a story behind that, which is when we put this book together, we were specifically asked by the editors. They said, you really have to put a time in here, and it's somewhere in here, but we were very resistant to it. We just didn't really want to put in how much time the child needed, because if you read the books, they're written for children who are typically developing, and the idea is it's supposed to, and don't write this down because I don't like to quote a time, it's supposed to be 9 to 11 hours for school age and 11 to 13 hours for preschool. The problem with that is we don't really know how much sleep an individual child needs, particularly a child with autism. And I've seen kids with autism only need 8 hours. And the problem is need, we don't know what need means. The studies, it's sort of like the cortisol, the studies haven't been done yet. I suspect that there are kids with autism who don't need as much sleep. We don't know that. We have to test it. But the biggest concern is if you follow the books and you try to get the parent to get their child to sleep 11 to 13 hours, because that's what the book says for typically developing, they put them to bed too early, because let's say you have to get up at 7 o'clock or 8 a.m. for preschool. Then to get the 11 to 13 hours, they have to go to bed 11 to 13 hours before that, and they may not be ready to go to bed at that time. So they lie awake, just like any of us. You lie awake, you're not really tired, you're not going to bed at your natural bedtime. It's similar to jet lag, let's say, for example. And then you're trying to fall asleep and you can't, and you fidget, and you're restless and you're anxious. And the kids with autism who have a tendency to be restless and anxious are just going to be more worked up. So what we finally compromised that we would do in these books is say, you know, this is what's recommended for typically developing children, but everybody's different. Children with autism may need less sleep. We don't know that for sure. But what we do know is that if you try to go to bed too early, and you can use yourself as an example, you're not going to get the same amount of sleep that you normally would. You're going to be more fidgety, you're going to be more anxious, and you might actually end up going to bed later and losing more sleep than if you would if you picked a later bedtime to begin with. And we're going to talk more about that this afternoon when we talk about the forbidden zone and the child's natural bedtime, and I have a slide on that we'll go through. So the short answer is, you know, the books are all well and good, but we don't really know how much sleep a child with autism needs, and everybody's different. I mean, you can go back to adults as well. There's such a thing as short sleepers, where some of us need 8 hours, otherwise we just can't function the next day. Some of us need 6 hours, and I've always been really jealous of the people who only needed 6 hours because they could get so much more done. But Thomas Edison was apparently one of those people who only needed 4, 5, 6 hours of sleep, and that may be why he invented the light bulb, because he was so bored, you know? But we're still trying to figure that out for autism. Yes?
Can you comment on the increasing use of technology and screen time and how that's come into your research?
Yeah, so screen time is a really interesting subject. In fact, there was a paper recently looking at screen time and autism and seeing that kids with autism who used computers or iPads, tablets, whatever, had less sleep, total sleep, which isn't earth-shattering, but is a very important point that was made. I mean, I think we all would have predicted that. And it is a problem, and it's a problem for two reasons. One is the screen things can be very stimulating. They can be stimulating video games, for example. The second thing is the light can be very stimulating, can actually suppress our natural melatonin levels. And I don't know if any of you have had this experience. I certainly have, where I'm like checking emails late at night. Deborah knows I do this. It's really bad. And I'll be checking emails, and I'll be on my computer. I'll be working on a talk or whatever. And I feel fine. I know I'm supposed to get to bed at 10 o'clock because my son's, you know, going to be up for school at 6 for the bus. But, you know, it's 9:30, 9:45, and I feel great. And then around 10:15, I realize I probably need to go to sleep, and my husband's like, when are we going to go to bed? And I sit up from my computer, and I'm like, whoa, I'm wiped out. But I didn't realize I was wiped out when I was sitting at my computer because the light was so stimulating, and I was so engaged in my video task, whatever I was doing, whether it was putting a talk together or answering emails. So there definitely is this effect of light on us, and it's the same light that helps us acclimate when we go to a new time zone, but it can be very stimulating when it comes in the form of videos. Now there is screen time. There's this concept of blue light that I haven't worked with much yet, but I'm really excited to do more with it, where you can actually, there's certain types of light that are more stimulating than others, and you can actually put covers and screens on the screens to block out this particular kind of light. As I said, I don't have a lot of experience with it, but that may be one way that we can decrease it. But I think the best strategy is, and you'll hear more about this afternoon, is to try to limit the screen time. If you can't limit it, move it earlier in the day so that it's not there at least 30 minutes, ideally an hour before bedtime. Yes?
What color would be less stimulating
Then the blue light, light is a whole spectrum, so it's like a rainbow, right? So if you can cut out this blue light, and I have to look up which frequency it is, but it's a specific frequency of spectrum of light. You can potentially not have the same problem. You know, the other place you'll read about it or hear about it is shift workers. When they're driving home in the morning, they've been on shift, they want to go home, they want to be able to go to sleep when they get home, but if they drive home and it's bright sunlight, that can interfere with their ability to go to sleep when they get home because it messes up their natural melatonin levels. But they can wear these blue blocking sunglasses that allow them to drive safely because the other light comes through, but it blocks the light that is particularly stimulating. Yes?
I've recommended that to some families, and I do find some families mention that using the iPad or watching TV before going to sleep actually helps some children fall asleep.
Right, that's a really good point. Some people do find that using the iPad or watching the TV helps, and this is always an interesting thing. I really do try to limit the light if I can. One of the nice things on some of these tablets, like the Kindles and others, is you can adjust, and even on the iPads, you can adjust the light level. So if the child does need a book or something, I will sometimes allow that or recommend that. And flexibility is so important. Sometimes kids like to hear some music before they go to bed, and I'm okay with that, or the noise from the television. I'm okay with that. We'll talk more this afternoon. The two things you have to watch out for are dependence on it, so that if it shuts off, they're not going to wake up because they don't have it anymore, and we'll talk about that this afternoon in more detail with the thing that you need most when you wake up is the thing that you had last before you went to bed, and then also making sure that it's just not stimulating and interfering.